Welcome to the Evolve Together with Empower People, the show that brings you inspiring stories, expert insights, and transformative advice on ESPN Richmond, powered by MikeKingBiz. I'm your host, Tiffany Joy Greene, MBA, founder of Empower People. Each week we dive into topics that matter most to you, whether it's personal growth, professional development, or community impact, and where everything is rooted in how purpose drives business and positive impact. Join us as we connect with dynamic guests, explore innovative ideas, and empower you to evolve and thrive in every aspect of your life. Stay tuned because together we can achieve greatness. Let's evolve together. To learn more about Empower People, you can visit www.empowerpeople.org. That's MPWRPeople.org, or find us on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, or #EmpowerPeople. So now let's dive into today's show with Mr. John Rabil. Hi, John. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. And I know we're going to be talking about shocking purpose and what that means to you personally and your small business firm, Entrepreneur Legal Advisors, otherwise known as ELA. We're going to be talking about the purpose behind that. But let's start with something just a little more, well, how should I say, fun. How's your summer going?
It's going well. I realize it's coming to a fast end. The school starts 3 weeks from yesterday, so it's winding down. Seems like it flew by.
It definitely didn't. My two kids, so my youngest, who's 11, graduated from elementary school, and then my daughter graduated from middle school. And it's hard for me to go like 3 weeks. I'm going to have a middle schooler and a high schooler.
Yeah.
What? It's true. The older we get, the time goes by faster.
It definitely feels like it.
And then mix the COVID time in it. It's like warp speed.
Yeah. Lost years.
Lost years. But why don't we lose the ones we want to? That's a whole
Yeah,
other show.
right.
That's a whole other show. So let's talk about Mr. John Rabil and why you decided to go into the legal profession and specifically small business law. What was the purpose behind that, John?
So I'd always had some interest in the legal profession, and then came out of college, was working at a job, and just thought I'd, give it a shot going into law school. Took the LSATs, went through law school, all of that. And so that's a quick, easy story about how I ended up as a lawyer.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be, but I feel like we've talked before. And don't you have a family member who owns a small business too?
Yeah, so my grandfather owned a restaurant when we were growing up in the town where we grew up, and there's some other family members that were involved in small businesses. So it was something that was sort of front and center as I was growing up.
So it was part of your life, really. I mean, that makes sense. Now let's segue now into ELA because I think, it sounds a little cheesy, but it is true. You do small business risk management different, right? So why don't you explain what that means first and then say why do you do it different?
Yeah, so I think a big differentiator is we're a subscription-based legal firm for entrepreneurs, small business owners. So the reason behind the subscription model in particular, I think, for legal services is that where business owners get in trouble, small business owners in particular, is they aren't aware of what's going on, what type of risks they have, regulations, whatever the case may be. And so it always ends up being reactive for them. So they get in trouble and then they've got to dig their way out of it. It's expensive, it's time consuming. And they don't use attorneys like large companies do as strategic advisors. I think that's sort of the root cause of where they end up in trouble. And so I think using a subscription-based model allows us to develop more of like a strategic partnership with our clients. And that way we can be proactive. We can advise them as they're moving through their business, whether they're just getting started or if they've been in business for a while, and help them sort of recognize and mitigate risk before they become issues, disputes, or full-blown, let's say, legal lawsuits.
Can you provide like an example of a situation you may have had with the client where they used you in this new way of doing legal services with you, that had you done it the more traditional way, they may not have picked up the phone and asked for advice, and what was the outcome because of doing this way versus the traditional way?
Yeah, so one thing that's talked about a lot is the difference between independent contractors and employees, and small businesses have either ignore or it's admittedly hard to stay on top of how you classify them. And so I was working with one of my clients and we're sort of doing an analysis on issues we might want to look at or areas to pay attention to. And one of the things that came up is they're using a lot of independent contractors. And so that's sort of a red flag to just pay attention to, I think. And we did a rundown analysis and sort of a whole process of determining how those workers should be classified. Are they independent contractors or are they employees? So we went through them all. It was like 50 total. And we were able to properly classify all of them and then have the correct documentation to show that we had properly classified all of them. And so the end result of that was, one, they're no longer at risk for improper classification, the penalties, the fines, the fees that come with that. And two, it likely saved them somewhere around $500,000 in potential liability. Audits are up. Lots of people in their field were getting audited. So it's a risk that, one, they didn't need to take. And two, obviously they could completely avoid if they had, or once we set it up right, they were on solid ground moving forward.
I would like to say, it's going to be public knowledge now, that you are also my attorney. And one of the things that I like about the model for me is this: if I have, and you're going to be able to attest to this, that if there is something, an opportunity that I'm considering, it's not even a done deal, it's just under the consideration stage, I can shoot you an email and go, John, I'm thinking about this. What's the potential risk? And I do that before I'm already down the rabbit hole, because you might say to me something that I didn't even think of, and I don't want to waste my time going, well, I thought that was cool, but now John just told me that this is going to like have all this risk associated that I'm not willing to take. So I can bring you in pretty early on, so then that way I don't waste time. That's one of the things I personally really like.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of what, or the manner in which small businesses should be using attorneys. I think first and foremost, they're an advisor. That's how Fortune 500 companies use attorneys, as a strategic advisor. There's no reason small businesses can't access the exact same type of service, entrepreneurs, and be able to get that type of advice before they get in trouble.
And I think too, like, I know with you, like if you're a small business owner, I mean, there's so many things that you can be looking at for them. For example, I'm going to, I'm pretending now. I've done this actually with you. I guess I don't technically have to pretend, but I'm going to run this promotion, John, and there's going to be a giveaway. What are the legal considerations? And so you're like, scan my email, go, yeah, we need to have some disclaimers here. We got to consider this. You got to make sure it's fair. So even those things that we may not think, oh, my lawyer should look at, you will look at, and it gives not just only, doesn't only protect the risk, but also gives you peace of mind. And another one's like the website. Like, you want to talk about just a little bit about that, like what you can do for some, like when you talk about your small business clients, like how can you help them with something just as obvious as we all need websites? Like, what can you do with that to help mitigate risk?
Yeah, so specifically around websites, there's a lot of privacy regulations if you're collecting personally identifiable information. So a good way to think about that is if you have a contact page, you're collecting it. And so, hard to say where you may be collecting it from or where people might be visiting your website from. So you might be subject to privacy regulations in states out west, Europe, who knows? Because specifically in the United States, we don't have a central federal privacy policy in terms of regulating that information online. So states are enacting their own individually But a lot of times, if anyone in a state can access your website, then you're subject to their privacy regulations, and you've got to make sure you're addressing that. Otherwise, there's a big market out there for people looking uh, to bust people who aren't complying with it and essentially have them pay fines and penalties. So things like that are easy to, or well, those are easy ways I think where we can come in and help people avoid a lot of potential risks because small businesses don't have set asides for legal issues like large companies do. So all of that matters.
I agree. And there was one other instance, this was years ago. I can't remember, I wouldn't mention the name anyway, but there was a software that I was looking at using. And then before they would like do a demo, they wanted me to sign this, I don't know if it was an NDA or what must probably been an NDA of some kind, but something about it just didn't feel right to me, and I sent it to you, and you're like, you circled like, yeah, this is kind of, ask them about what this means. We need some questions and clarifications on that. So again, always be careful of what you're signing. And I know Mike King, when you've been talking to Mike King, he always says if you think you need John today, it's probably late. You probably needed him like 5 days ago, 2 weeks ago. And the reality is, when should somebody really start, like, when should they have an attorney?
Well, of course, I'm biased, right? From the very beginning. No. I think it's somewhat dependent on your specific situation, but the general rule is probably sooner rather than later. One of the common things I hear is, well, I'm not getting sued, so I don't have any legal or risk issues. Well, that may be true, but you don't necessarily know that. So, for example, like one of my clients I started working with, of course, they're not getting sued or facing a lawsuit, but we start sort of going through an audit of their potential risk. And they've got some contract issues that they don't recognize that weren't necessarily a big deal when they had two clients. But when you have 250, and if that blows up, I mean, we're talking potential millions of dollars worth of issues that they wouldn't have recognized. And if it did blow up, I mean, they're not sitting on millions of dollars to pay out damages and legal fees. So I think sort of shifting the focus from a reactive, like, oh, I don't need a lawyer unless I'm getting sued, to I might be able to use a lawyer as an advisor and someone who can keep me out of trouble.
I would say, and I'll tell you some advice I've given. Nobody's asked me recently for this advice because most of the people I deal with are already in business. And so if you're already in business, it's your primary income. I'm like, you need to have an attorney. But if you are, I used to say, like, if you're doing like a side hustle, do they necessarily have to have an attorney? Depends on more times than not. And then, of course, it's industry related too. Probably not. But if you're even a solopreneur and you are, what you're making from your business is what's putting food on the table, you need to have an attorney. Like if it's a primary income or a secondary income that you're depending on for your household, I think it's good. It also keeps things, it also from a negotiation, like I've experienced it. If I get a contract from somebody and we're in negotiation, I say, well, look, I got to have my attorney look at that. It suddenly sets the stage. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, that's the big difference with corporations. Well, I got to have my legal counsel look at this versus some, if it's one person coming into the business trying to negotiate a deal with a corporation, they have the leg up because they have a whole legal team.
Yeah, that, and I think, one thing I see people get in trouble with a lot with contracts is not even negotiation. It's as simple as they don't know what they're agreeing to. And, you hear about automatic renewals. So you're automatically rolled into a contract again for another year that you wanted to get out of. You don't know how much liability you're potentially giving up in a contract because you weren't paying attention to the terms. So even something like that can go a long way with peace of mind or just issue spotting of things to watch out for.
And would you say, I know with you and your services, for example, like if we have certain filings, some things coming due either with the county, the state, or whatnot, like you remind your clients like this is coming up, we're gonna have to pay that $50 fee, whatever the fee is, right? Um, that's not typical for most small business attorneys. Am I wrong? I mean, I've done my homework, but you tell me.
Yeah, I think if the attorney's not acting as your registered agent, then it's not typical for them to stay on top of it. But we try to stay on top of it regardless because it's a fairly easy thing to do and stay compliant with, but the repercussions of it are massive. If your business is automatically canceled by the state because you forgot to pay your annual $50 LLC file, right now you're sitting on a bunch of personal liability. You have no idea. So again, that could be huge repercussions.
That makes sense. I'm going to ask you this question. I wasn't planning on it, but again, I feel I see it, I hear it all of the time. You do too, we all do. But let's break it down for the small business owner. AI. What, in terms of risk management, what should they be concerned with if they're utilizing AI in their business?
Yeah, so it's a moving target on how that's going to play out. Generally, I'd say you want to be careful of copyright issues, like something's generated by AI, who actually owns it. And it, in particular, at this point, I would say you want to make sure that what's generated by the AI isn't something that's already owned by someone else. There's a chance it wasn't even just created by the AI. It's just been sort of all pulled together from various online sources by the AI, and you're inadvertently getting something that violates another business's or individual's copyright. And so my general rule of thumb with my clients when we talk about AI is it might be a good starting place to generate some things, but copying and pasting AI is probably too risky at this point.
So it sounds like your advice and my advice are the same. It's kind of like if you're needing something to bounce an idea off of, or you're getting writer's block, let AI kind of be that, sounding board, so to speak, and it'll shoot back. But don't. It's almost like don't plagiarize. It's like what our generation. Sorry, I'm outing us in our age, John, but like we were the generation that some of the classmates were plagiarizing off Google, right? And now the kiddies are in essence, are plagiarizing using AI tools, right? Because they're letting somebody else do their critical thinking for them.
Yeah. And so I think you got to be careful with some of that. And it'll definitely be a ongoing risk discussion about issues with AI. And it's not going anywhere, obviously. So that'll be important for a couple of reasons. One, those rules, regulations, whatever you will probably be constantly changing. And two, everything's continuing to move online or technology based. So AI is just going to become more of a potential tool or asset for small businesses. So they've got to figure out how to navigate through that.
Now I'm going to switch gears. We talked about it, I believe, at the Empower Hour event, not last month, but the month before. But since this is going to be on ESPN Richmond as a quick show, what should the audience know about possible changes to employment law regarding salary and wages and all that? What should they be what should they know preparing for at this point?
Yeah, so the thing around that is dealing with exempt, non-exempt workers and when an employee, not an independent contractor, is entitled to overtime. So there's several rules, but you have to essentially meet a certain salary threshold, make a certain amount, and have certain duties or responsibilities as part of your job in order to be exempt from overtime. So the salary threshold is going up. People who are under the salary threshold, I can't remember the new one off the top of my head, but it's a fairly significant increase, are going to be entitled to receive overtime, even if they're not hourly employees. So that's one thing I think people are getting in trouble with. And there's a significant amount of confusion around exempt versus non-exempt. Some of the numbers I've seen are in line with 85% of companies have misclassified exempt and non-exempt. So I
It
think
is confusing though. Let's be honest. I mean, the government doesn't make any of
absolutely
that
confusing.
like
Yeah, it's not straightforward. It is confusing. There's, of course, exceptions to it that come into play. I do think, though, with it's something to be aware of because they're implementing a change, which means it'll be something that's on their radar to start looking at. Now, feasibly, they can't audit every small business in the company, but there'll be some increased risk of getting an audit around that in the short term, of course, with that change.
Since we're talking about employment law and things like that, some of the folks that you help are not just small businesses, but nonprofits. So tell us a little bit about what things you may be looking at differently for a nonprofit than a small business, and what you can help them with.
Yeah, so one of the things is so like the most common for-profit structure I see is an LLC. With nonprofits, you're set up like a corporation. So one of the things that we first look at is to make sure you set yourself up properly as a non-stock corporation in Virginia and followed all of that. Name the proper board of directors, officers, what have you. So making sure you're running that way is a good starting point, lays sort of a solid foundation. Then another thing that we look at is sort of how you're using labor and what are your options there that aren't available for for-profits. For example, volunteers. So nonprofits can use volunteers. It's great. People get to volunteer. They're giving back to the community. Nonprofits get some free help. So how you can maximize that to your advantage is another area we start looking into it. But then surprisingly, and this is news to some nonprofits when they get started, in a lot of respects, it's no different than running and operating a for-profit business. The business still the same. You can make money. Nonprofit doesn't mean you can't make money. You just have to make sure you're accounting for it correctly. But you're incurring a lot of the same risk that a for-profit business would be. A lot of times they're holding events. They've got some employees, maybe even if it's only one or two. They're into a lot of contracts with third parties. One thing with nonprofits I see a lot, I'd say more consistently than for-profits, is they do a lot of sort of strategic relationships with, there might be another nonprofit that's similar in terms of the service they're providing. And so they partner together to do an event or what have you. And so those are great opportunities, but they also bring on a certain amount of risk because you're starting to work with another company that you don't know the ins and outs of. And how are you going to allocate the risk and responsibilities across that? That's important.
Yeah, I love that you say that because I think, I say that all the time. There's not much difference. It's a legal structure, nonprofit versus for-profit, but at the end of the day, they're still businesses. Now we don't have much time left, but I didn't want to be remiss and not ask you this. So recently you became a certified small business and nonprofit advisor through Empower People. So now you can provide some advisory services through Empower People, not as an attorney, right? But as a risk management advisor. Tell me why you did that. Why did you decide to go and say, oh my gosh, I want to get more involved. I want to get this certification. How does that align with your purpose, John?
Yeah, so good question. Generally speaking, my purpose, the purpose of ELA, or is to make quality legal services more available to small businesses, entrepreneurs, and in particular, make sure those services are, transparent, efficient, and cost effective. So that's sort of the overall purpose. And when you talk about bringing in Empower People under that, it's a great opportunity for me to get in front of some small businesses, nonprofits, and on a high level, but still discuss like risk management, maybe point out things to them they're not aware of and help them a little bit as they're getting started. And, the idea would be maybe just a little bit of advice here, help them avoid a lot of trouble down the road. And as they grow and expand, there's opportunities for them to access other resources from people inside of that community. But it's a good way for me to sort of help stay on the purpose of ELA and get involved with a good organization.
I love that. And of course, I'm going to do a little plug in for myself. First, I'm going to say congratulations to John for getting through the certification. We don't hand them out like candy, do we, John? You had
No,
to
Not quite.
But so congratulations to John for that. But I also want to say definitely check out his website and check out his branding. Wink, wink. I think I know the person who did it. That's sarcasm. It's elapractice.com. That's elapractice.com. You can read more about John and his practice there, and specifically like the packages. And there's a lot of blogs and content you can read. I know there's some good blogs on the difference between subcontractors and employees, for example. And also you can follow John on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. If I'm right? There's no other social media channels. Am I missing any?
No, that's pretty much it.
LinkedIn, I'd say, is your number one. Is that correct?
LinkedIn's easily the number one. Yeah.
Easily. I wonder why. Professionals targeting professionals. Shocking.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you, John, for being on the Evolve Together with Empower People show. Hopefully I didn't make you sweat too much. I think it was pretty easy and breezy. But the show is featured on ESPN Richmond. It's aired at 5 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, and it's powered by MikeKingBiz. Again, I'm your host, Tiffany Joy Greene, and I'm the founder of Empower People. And it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. Hopefully, through this episode, we've inspired you, provided some valuable insights, and empowered you to take the next step in your purpose-driven journey. Don't forget to connect with Empower People on social media like LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, and share your thoughts. We like to have conversations over here at Empower People. And join the Empower People community. You can join for free at empowerpeople.org/join. That's MPWRPeople.org/join. And until next time, keep evolving, stay empowered, and remember that together we can achieve greatness. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you on the next episode of Evolve Together with Empower People. Let's evolve together.